Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Amy Bender. So I first came across Amy through Greg Potter, who our audience will know has come on many times talking about sleep, and Amy is also a big fanatic of sleep. She's awake right now and hopefully wide awake for the podcast, but she specializes in working with athletes for optimizing their sleep. And so I thought she would be someone perfect to bring onto the show to delve into that. And I want to first of all ask Amy to I'm actually very interested into what got you interested in sleep, specifically with athletes, and what's taking you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I started in the sleep field, I guess it's been almost 15 years ago. I went to my aunt's sleep lab in Portland, Oregon, where she was a sleep technologist. And she introduced me to the lab, hooked up patients with electrodes across the scalp, the chest, looking at brainwave activity, monitoring muscle activity, eye activity, and then how those signals translate into sleep stages. So she also showed me the different stages of sleep. I was pretty much hooked. I went back to my hometown in Spokane, Washington, volunteered at a sleep lab, ended up landing a job at the Sleep and Performance Research Center at Washington State University as their lead sleep technologist, which was very lucky on my end to get that job without any experience. And then was a sleep technologist there, so hooking up participants with electrodes, helping run sleep deprivation studies, scoring for the different stages of sleep. I was a sleep technologist for about 4 years. And then after that, I started my master's, did my master's and PhD in experimental psychology, focusing on sleep EEG and the impact of sleep deprivation on cognitive health and performance. And then after my PhD, I wanted to combine my passion with sports and athletics. I was an athlete all my life. I played 3 sports in high school. I played college basketball. I did an Ironman. I've done some mountaineering. So I wanted to combine my sleep expertise with my passion for sport. Ended up at the University of Calgary, working with Canadian Olympic team athletes. And then currently I'm still working with athletes doing some consulting, but I'm the senior research scientist at Calgary Counseling Center, where I'm looking at sleep interventions for better mental health.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's always interesting to hear like the backstory, and obviously I think you said your aunt kind of got you into everything, and I was wondering whether or not sometimes people get really into the thick of their field because they've had issues in that area themselves. So I was wondering if you had any kind of horrific backstory to terrible sleep or anything. But is your sleep generally good?
My sleep is generally good. So I have 3 little kids though, and they've been away for the last couple nights, and I've noticed a difference. Just you get interrupted a lot with children, and it's just so nice to get to bed early, get a solid night's sleep, wake up without an alarm, and my alarm being my kids. Yeah, overall, yeah, I haven't really struggled with sleep disorders or anything like that. I've been generally a healthy sleeper.
That's good to hear. And actually, I know I didn't say this was going to be a question, but I think you'd probably have some decent advice, because I have clients who struggle with their sleep and they have children. And my kind of best advice is do your best job. Don't stress about what you can't control. Do you have any kind of things you've developed as kind of, obviously, you know this stuff inside out and you have children? Any strategies to kind of get the most from your sleep whilst having those kind of circumstances?
It is. It's so challenging because they're so unpredictable. You know, one night they may sleep through the night, another night wake you up multiple times during the night. So I would say trying to get to bed early, which can be hard for people, but really trying to prioritize sleep. And we always want time for ourselves, and that ends up being a lot of times at night too. So kind of trying to balance that. Napping was huge for me. So especially with my youngest, he just turned 3, When he was born, I had a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and then a newborn. So napping was a big part of my routine early on. So it's likely that maybe your nighttime sleep is going to be impacted with children, but potentially when they're napping, you can nap as well. So that was a huge strategy to get me through.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So, yeah, the first question I wanted to talk about specifically, obviously delving into kind of athletes and their sleep, was the kind of general recommendation I think a lot of the audience have probably heard is kind of adults need between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And like athletes put their bodies through a heck of a lot. And I do also want to position this and see if there's any difference between athletes and then just kind of hard going trainees in the gym. A lot of the listeners here will be training 1 to 2 hours, 4 to 6 times a week. So probably not as quite as heavy as what an athlete will be doing, depending on the sport, I would assume, but still kind of doing more than maybe the average person doing maybe 30 minutes of activity a day, if that for some people. How do your guidelines differ? Like, do we need more?
We do think that athletes need more. I would say the majority of sleep scientists working with athletes do think that they need more because of the physical and mental demands of the sport. So like you said, we need 7 to 9 hours for a normal, healthy adult. And more sleep isn't necessarily better in that situation. So there's more and more research coming out that more of that 7 to 8 hours is ideal. And in particular, I just did a study on looking at depression levels and the amount of sleep people are getting. And in my study, I found both long and short sleep was associated with higher levels of depression, with 7.5 hours being that sweet spot for the lowest depression scores. So I think people need to keep that in mind. More is not necessarily always better. And there is a lot of variation in the inter-individual variability in the amount of sleep that people need. So for me, I need about 7.5 hours. For someone else, it may be more like 8.5. So that's important to keep in mind. And then we think athletes need more. So that recommendation may be more like 8 to 10 instead of 7 to 9 in adults. But it depends on the training load. If you have a high endurance athlete with a high cognitive load as well, they may need a little bit more. If you have maybe a low endurance but more strength training, maybe a lot of cognitive demand, they may not need as much as someone with high endurance activity. But I will say that more research is definitely needed in this area. There was a study that came out in rodents showing that when they're exercising more, they're generating more slow wave activity. So slow wave activity is when at sleep, we see that during the deepest stage of sleep, and that's where growth hormone is being released, tissues are being repaired, memories are being enhanced. And they found that those rodents actually didn't need as much sleep because they may have been fulfilling some of that slow wave activity while they're doing a monotonous activity. And what we see in the research is that triathletes are actually getting the least amount of sleep when we look at different athletes across sports, which is really interesting. You would think they would be getting a lot more just for that recovery piece. But I have a little anecdotal story. I was working with Dave Proctor, who was attempting to run across Canada and break the Trans-Canadian Speed Record running, which would require him to run about 100 kilometers per day, about 60 miles a day for 66 days in a row.
Wow.
So I was working with him and we wanted to look at his sleep objectively in the laboratory, pre-race, also during the race, and then after the race. And when we did look at his sleep before the race, he had had a very high training day. I think he was in around that 100 kilometer range on that particular day. So I was expecting to see a lot of deep sleep occurring during the night. And when we looked at his results, we sent it in, got it scored, and it came back and it was actually really low amount of deep sleep. And I was really surprised by this. When I looked at the EEG, I could have scored potentially a few more stages of deep sleep. So it may be a little bit of a score error there. But it was shocking to me that he was not getting more deep sleep than definitely way less than I expected. So I think there's a lot more to be explored here. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a potential caveat.
No, it's definitely interesting because I guess the listeners here will be more potentially physique competitors or people doing kind of weight training, but maybe some cardio alongside. And I guess maybe the weight training isn't that monotonous kind of activity. It's quite high intensity, or you'd hope. But some people might be doing lots of cardio, maybe if they're trying to kind of diet down for something and lose some weight, and potentially that they're getting some of that kind of the slow wave activity and needing not as much sleep as they might expect they need. And is that something you can almost auto-regulate? Is there a good way of kind of knowing how much sleep you should be getting? So like, I don't know, like you said, there's variation. Some people need more, some need less. You might need more at particular times.
I think if possible, sleeping without an alarm clock will help kind of regulate and help you understand the amount of sleep that you need. So I think that's the best way if possible, is to go to bed when you feel sleepy. And obviously, caffeine can mask the impact of how sleepy you're feeling. Bright light can mask the impact of your alertness. So you want to try and avoid those, too close to bedtime. And caffeine we can get into a little bit later because I have an opinion on that. But so under normal conditions, when you're not masking with some of these activities that may mask your levels of sleepiness, I think going to bed when you're sleepy, waking up without an alarm, and looking at your levels of alertness across the day to see, oh, wow, I'm pretty sleepy today. Maybe I should have gotten more sleep, or potentially the quality of the sleep is poor. So that's another consideration. The three key factors that we're looking at is quantity of sleep, the amount of sleep that you're getting. The quality of sleep matters as well. So if you're getting 10 hours of sleep, but you're waking up multiple times during the night, potentially from a sleep disorder, that's not going to be very restful. And then the timing of sleep is important too. So trying to sleep in line with your chronotype, your preference for being a night owl or an early bird. So yeah, I think just an easy test might be to go to sleep when you're sleepy and then wake up without an alarm clock. And kind of sometimes that's challenging to do when we have work responsibilities, but maybe doing this on a vacation when you don't have to get up for work or have some of these obligations may be a way to test that.
Yeah, I really like that. And I like that you kind of caveated it in that people can't just expect to be able to do it if they don't have an understanding of the modern day environment and how kind of even what they're taking in dietary wise and kind of their environment could be impacting that. Because I didn't realize kind of all those different things like the blue light and the brightness and caffeine and the half-life of that. So we'll definitely dig into that. But something I wanted to touch on just before was the idea of kind of banking sleep and hitting like a weekly sleep average. And I think you mentioned just there that kind of the quality is important, so is timing. So maybe this kind of disrupts some of that, because obviously the timing is going to be a bit different if you're banking sleep and trying to hit a weekly average. But is that something you can do? Just like, I guess you're kind of almost getting more back by having naps. Can you do the same thing with sleeping more? Maybe people can do that on the weekend versus midweek. They don't have that flexibility.
Yeah, I'm probably more, there are a lot of sleep scientists out there that say you need to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time every single day of the week. And, consistency in sleep is important. So there's been studies to show that when we're looking at equal amounts of sleep, the differences between a regular sleeper and an irregular sleeper, those who are more regular sleepers have better sleep quality. They have earlier melatonin release. They actually get better grades. They have better performance. So consistency is important. So you don't want to, for example, get 5 hours of sleep Monday through Friday, and then on the weekend sleep in 3 hours, and then, okay, I fulfilled my weekly requirement, I'm good to go. Doesn't quite work that way, but I think people can be flexible. So trying to hit that minimum, maybe 7 hours, and then potentially sleep in on the weekends within an hour, no later than an hour and a half, or supplementing with a nap during the day, getting up at a consistent time. But then if I got a poor night's sleep, my child woke me up, I'm still going to get up at a consistent time, but I'm going to supplement with a nap during the day can be a useful strategy for people. And as far as banking sleep goes, I think it's a really important strategy for athletes approaching an important competition, or even, for example, a night shift worker who is approaching a bunch of night shifts in a row. Banking sleep has been shown to improve performance during that sleep deprivation period and help you perform better. So in athletes in particular, we see reductions in reaction time in rugby players. We see improvements in serving accuracy in tennis players. We see improvement in free throw shooting in basketball players. So getting more sleep leading into that important competition, potentially at least 1 week before, potentially 2 weeks before that important competition, is going to be really useful for performance during that competition. And I think another benefit is it helps reduce anxiety with a poor night's sleep prior to that competition, because we don't sleep quite as well. You know, when I did my Ironman, you had to be at the site at 6 o'clock in the morning. So of course, and I have the anxiety of the competition itself. So of course, I'm not going to be getting a solid, 7-8 hours of sleep prior to that competition. But with banking sleep leading into that, I think it helps reduce some of that anxiety if you do get a poor night's sleep prior to that competition.
Yeah, I really like kind of it's not a black and white answer in that, I mean, you can just hit a weekly average or you have to hit the same times. I guess a lot of people think about kind of your body doesn't know what time it is. Like, you don't have to be in bed at 10 p.m. every night, but within a range of like an hour or so. I really like that kind of idea of a little bit of flexibility when you're actually tired, because I guess day to day, if someone's training rest day versus a training day or whatever it's going to be, they might be more or less tired at a particular time, or a really stressful day at work, kind of a bit more kind of active, and they might be tired way earlier. So that makes a lot of sense. And something I'm interested in is the idea of banking sleep. I don't know if I've ever tried it actively, but part of me wonders how easy it is to do it, because if you're not extra tired at that time, how easy is it to oversleep at that time? Like, is it something that we're good at doing, kind of sleeping excessive amounts to what we need at the time?
It is pretty interesting, because I think a lot of sleep scientists debate the term banking sleep. Some don't even think it exists. They think, but I think it's a matter of semantics. They define it more as paying off the sleep debt that's already accrued. So it's kind of depends on how you interpret it. Is it paying off the sleep debt that's already accrued, or is it actually banking sleep in advance to then help with sleep deprivation down the road? So it is kind of a matter of semantics. I think for someone who's getting their sufficient amount of sleep day in and day out, that they may have issues trying to bank sleep, leading into that competition. So I wouldn't fret if you have an inability to bank sleep. It may be that you're just getting the sufficient amount of sleep that you need. But potentially, adding in a 30-minute nap can help potentially bank some of that leading into the competition. Maybe sleeping in a half hour, trying to get to bed earlier, can be ways to not make it so excessive where, okay, I want to be in bed for 10 hours. A lot of people, that could cause insomnia because you're just not tired. You can't go to bed early enough. Keeping that in mind, that if you are getting a sufficient amount, then it may be a little bit more challenging to bank some of that sleep.
That makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense in terms of for a lot of the people I end up working with, or people listening again, athletes in general, you'll be going through your training program, accumulating fatigue, and eventually you'll need kind of one of those lighter weeks or something to dissipate that fatigue. And your sleep might not be that great in the period of time. Maybe you're overreaching or very, very fatigued. And then that kind of deload week or the kind of lighter week of training, probably easy to bank sleep because you're not training so much. You're probably very sleepy because of all the kind of fatigue and kind of probably not been sleeping enough previously. And you can kind of make up for that and in a sense recharge whilst you're also dissipating fatigue just physiologically from training lighter as well. So it kind of nicely works in with that paradigm that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and it works nicely with tapering, tapering before an important competition too. It's likely that your training load isn't as high, so you may have more opportunity to sleep more.
Fast, efficient fat loss. Does that sound like music to your ears? The mini cut movement might just be for you. Mini cuts are like robbing the fat bank. You want to get in and out with as much fat as possible. In a short period of time, you could easily look to lose 6 to 12 pounds of fat. The mini cut movement is excellent. There's group support for extra accountability and also expert help within the group. We have educational videos to keep you on track along the way, and you get all your nutrition and training customized and individualized for you. So if that sounds of interest, get involved with the mini cut movement. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So yeah, the next question is going to be the caffeine use. And it's really interesting to me because I think within the space I'm in where people are just like pre-workouts are like used all over the place by like bodybuilders and gym goers, like the people just love it.
I'm shaking my head right now.
So this is something, I used to use them a lot, and in finding more out about sleep, I was like, why am I using this? Just my performance could be better if my sleep was better, and that might dissipate the effect of what caffeine, like it could be more powerful than what the caffeine is going to do for me. So I find it really interesting that people do this sort of thing, and I'd love to hear, obviously you've shook your head, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of caffeine use for athletes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first thing to point out is that there was a study on pre-workouts, and the amount of caffeine ranged from, I think, 90 milligrams to up to almost 400 milligrams, which is 4 cups of coffee, So, and some people are taking this prior to an evening workout, and it's going to have a huge negative impact on your sleep quality, which will then compromise the workout itself, So people really need to be aware of the impact of caffeine on sleep. So generally we see it takes longer to fall asleep, but we see less deep sleep activity. So that's, again, where I mentioned growth hormone is being released, tissues are being repaired. And if you're having a bunch of caffeine in the evening, it's certainly going to impact that. And I will also say there was a study that just came out showing that an energy drink with dinner, so that's about 80 milligrams of caffeine in adolescents, ended up reducing their deep sleep by about 20 minutes. And when they asked the adolescents, do you think this impacted your sleep? The majority said, no, this caffeine had no impact on my sleep. It didn't impact their ability to fall asleep. They were still able to fall asleep very quickly. And it didn't objectively impact the amount of times that they were waking up during the middle of the night for long periods of time where you'd be able to remember that. But it was impacting that deep sleep, that fountain of youth that we're all trying to, take advantage of. So it is challenging to be able to understand how caffeine does impact my sleep quality, because you may think, oh, I'm fine. I can drink caffeine at dinner and it's not going to impact my sleep. But the reality is it likely is impacting your sleep. So the way you metabolize caffeine is also a factor. So there was a study by Dr. Nancy Guest, which found that 4 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of caffeine, or per kilogram of body weight, prior to a cycling time trial impaired performance by 14% compared to placebo in slow metabolizers of caffeine. So that CYP1A2 gene, those who have the slow metabolizer of that gene actually saw an impairment in performance when using caffeine. So I think the best way is to get a nutrigenomics test to determine, are you a fast metabolizer of caffeine? Are you a slow metabolizer of caffeine? And then gauge your use of caffeine based on that.
That's really interesting. And on that test, is there, I guess, you're US based, is there like like any companies you recommend, or is it something you can find quite easily on a Google search? I've actually never heard about it, and I think it's quite interesting. How easy is it to go and get done?
Well, I am colleagues with Dr. Gesh. She does have a company that she's working with. She's actually, I think, maybe the lead scientist of, it's called Nutrigenomics. So I am a little bit biased in that regard, but I know that, and she's biased as well, but I know that this is a very high quality nutrigenomics test that you can get by this company called Nutrigenomics. So, but I will disclose that I am colleagues with her. But yeah, I think people could probably Google it and find this type of test. And they also look at how you metabolize lactose. It's more nutrition based as well. So it's not just about caffeine per se, but it also may give you good information with optimizing your nutrition as well.
Cool. And I guess if people are stubborn or not wanting to get the test done, is there a rule of thumb kind of that people can follow for when to maybe cap their caffeine by a particular time, or even an amount of caffeine per day that you might recommend people stay under?
I know if you think about even the half-life of caffeine is around 6 hours. So the quarter life of caffeine is around 12 hours. So if you have a 100 milligram cup of coffee at noon, a quarter of that's going to be in your system at midnight, which is, maybe around a black tea, a green tea, maybe a little bit less. But if you subtract some hours of that more closer to bedtime, you may have the equivalent of a black tea in your system at bedtime, which you would never drink. I hope you would never drink a black tea just right at bedtime and hope that it's going to improve your sleep quality. So I would say noon at a minimum, and then maybe even shifting that a little bit earlier, depending on how you feel. Maybe 10 a.m. would be a better estimate.
Cool. Yeah, so I think for a lot of the listeners, probably there'd be potentially people doing a 9 to 5, and then they're feeling kind of sleepy after work, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to take a pre-workout. Maybe this is 5:30, 6 p.m. at night. And this, like you said, pre-workouts, you're easily getting 300 milligrams of caffeine in there. And yeah, they're going to bed with that all in their system, which is going to be really tough for them to try and get through that. Is it actually on that regard, do you have any thoughts and kind of ways around like other strategies people can use instead of using caffeine at those times? Is it just a case of if you're well rested and well kind of slept, that you should possibly feel better at that time?
And I wanted to touch on the vicious cycle as well. So you take the pre-workout in the evening, you have poor quality sleep, and then the following day you feel like crap and, automatically reach for that caffeine. So there is kind of a vicious cycle there. Can you remind me what your question was again? Because I was thinking more along the lines of the vicious cycle.
No, that's a great point with the vicious cycle, because I think probably everyone listening has been in the vicious cycle where, it just is a knock-on effect. You need more and more to get the same response. I actually, on that lines, before I asked you that question I had before, is there any way, what's your best way of kind of getting out of the vicious cycle? Or if someone is highly dependent on caffeine, do you have a strategy of kind of tapering that down, going cold turkey? How long do you need to kind of have a washout period for if you do need one?
That's a great question. I started to go decaf myself when my youngest was about 6 months old. And getting through graduate school I ended up defending my master's when I was pregnant with my first. I had my first, then I had my second when I was defending my PhD, and I had my third during the postdoc. So I was hooked on caffeine at that point. Just graduate school alone can cause you to increase your caffeine consumption. But it was about when my youngest was about 6 months old, that I really wanted to get off the caffeine and not be reliant on it every single morning. So what I did was I gradually tapered. So I started to reduce my consumption, do like a cup of coffee one day, then the next day try and have a black tea. And then if I got really tired in the afternoon, I might have a green tea. So I think kind of trying to gradually reduce your consumption is a good idea instead of going cold turkey. And then for me, it took about 2 weeks to get the caffeine completely out of my system to where I started getting refreshing sleep. It was amazing. And I wasn't reliant on that caffeine every morning. So it does take a while for caffeine to get out of your system. And I think gradually reducing your consumption. And then if you have a really poor night's sleep, don't be afraid to have a green tea in the afternoon or a black tea in the afternoon. And just kind of try and gradually get it out of your system. And then currently I am, so I have, I'm showing my coffee cup right now. I mix half calf coffee. So I'm in Canada. So we have Kicking Horse Coffee, which is an amazing coffee that we have here. They have a blend that's half caffeine. So it has half the caffeine as usual. And they also have a decaf blend. So what I do is I kind of mix the two so that I'm only getting about a quarter cup of caffeine. And I potentially have 2 cups. So maybe it's about a half a cup of caffeine, maybe 50 milligrams. And then I'll kind of alternate between coffee and tea. So the next day I might do green tea. I try and alternate between coffee and tea every other day, and then completely go off caffeine for a while. And yeah, it really seems to work for me, and it doesn't mask my levels of sleepiness. So it helps me determine, okay, I really need to take a nap today, or I really need to go to bed early. And I think it's really useful for people to drink caffeine strategically. I'm not saying get rid of it altogether, but drink it strategically rather than automatically.
Yeah, I really like that approach. And caffeine, I didn't really realize how much caffeine has a flavor in itself, in that you can tell if something's certainly coffee, you can tell if it's decaf or caffeinated, but even like a Pepsi or a Coke, you can get caffeine free versions, which I thought was great because I can have the same flavor and everything, but they also don't taste the same. I think this is a really important discussion, just because for competitors to like a physique stage, they're often low on energy and they're trying to replace that somehow. And so caffeine becomes a real big thing that they start taking more of. They're already in a really stressed state, kind of training hard, dieting down to very lean levels. And then they're having all this caffeine. So their sleep is just getting worse and worse and worse. So I think it's really important for people to hear about this, because I think probably I guess physique competitors isn't your area of kind of speciality, but I guess you'd be like, be careful with using it excessively like that, and using it, like you said, more strategically is a really good strategy. And even people use it to get around like hunger pangs and things. I think there's other things, probably even other supplements that people could probably use instead of caffeine in those cases.
Absolutely. There's been studies actually comparing caffeine to napping. And in some instances, napping is actually better for alertness, performance. So in the time it takes you to get a Starbucks coffee, you could be napping for 10 minutes and experiencing the same results without such a negative impact on your sleep quality at night.
I love that. And also saving a good amount of money there as well. So multiple wins at the same time.
Although there are some nap studios out there where you can actually pay to take a nap. I remember seeing those at one point. That is amazing. In terms of kind of one of the challenges I've seen within your research and what you've looked at for athletes is kind of that competition that's coming, and kind of they get anxiety about it and really kind of worried about it. And I think the same happens for anyone that kind of trains hard, or again, if they're having a physique competition in future. Have you found any particular strategies that help them kind of calm themselves and not kind of anyone has stress just about work or something? It could probably work very similarly, I guess. Is there anything people can do to try and prevent that causing their sleep to be worse? Having a pre-sleep routine, so having a bedtime routine is really important, especially for the traveling athlete as well, because it'll help you prepare your mind and body for sleep at home, but also on the road. If you have those similar routines, it's not just important for a toddler, for example, to have a sleep routine. It's also important for adults for us to prepare our mind and body for sleep. We can't just flip a switch and expect to fall asleep instantly. So putting away those electronic devices an hour before bedtime, adding in a warm bath or shower, which temporarily increases temperature, but then makes it easier to fall asleep because your temperature drops. Having a gratitude journal, having a to-do list right before bedtime, which is going to help offload those thoughts off your mind, get them on paper, make it easier for you to fall asleep and stay asleep. And then having breathing techniques, relaxation techniques. I like the cognitive shuffle. So that's, you think of a word such as bedtime, you imagine all the objects you can, starting with B. So ball, baby, bag, bus, banana. When you can't think of any more, you go on to the next letter, E, eagle, egg, ear. And by the time you get to the end of the word, you'll be sound asleep. So I use that for myself when I'm having issues falling asleep at the beginning of the night, but also strategy for when I wake up in the middle of the night. I use that strategy. Also doing the 4-7-8 breathing technique helps activate your parasympathetic nervous system, that relaxation system. So you would breathe in for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 7, breathe out for 8 seconds, and repeat that 4 times. There's also a new one that I discovered was the 5-finger breathing. So you trace your finger up. So you breathe in, you trace your thumb up. When you get to the top, you breathe out and you go down, and then you repeat. So you breathe in all the way to the top, and then, breathe out, heading down as you trace the finger. And this helps kind of activate your more of a mindfulness technique, because you're using a lot of your senses to engage, and that helps activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So absolutely, athletes in general population definitely need techniques to help them relax and prepare for sleep.
It's actually interesting you mentioned the breathing technique. I know we spoke a little bit about what they called Fitbits and those sort of devices, but it's just reminding me, on Fitbit they have a function which is called relax, and you press it and it kind of does it gets you to do the breathing. It's very similar to what you said there. Maybe exactly that it's using. I don't know if you even know that the Fitbit does this kind of relax technique.
Oh wow, that's great. That's good to have. Yeah, I don't use a sleep tracker myself, but for some people, yes, it can be beneficial at trying to motivate behavior change. However, there is a certain population where they become more anxious by having it. And then people need to also be aware of the validity of the results. So they are getting better, but they aren't quite there yet. And I hear time and time again, people will reach out to me saying, my tracker is telling me I'm only getting 10% deep sleep. What's going on here? Like, they're really worried about it. When in reality, it's likely that they're definitely getting more deep sleep. It's just the accuracy of the device is impairing that. And so yeah, people need to be aware of that, and how is the device helping you. I think it can be useful in many instances, but it can create more anxiety in certain type of athletes and certain type of people in the general public.
I find it really interesting because yourself and Greg both kind of very into this area, and neither of you use a tracker for your sleep, which I find very interesting. And I don't know if that says it all, in a sense, in that potentially it's not something Greg often talks about, the way he approaches sleep often, and it sounds like you're very similar. It's kind of like, a lot of it is almost intuition. Like, it's almost like too simple. Like, if you feel well rested, you don't need a device to tell you if you're well rested or underslept. You probably know the next day. And it's very interesting. And in regards to devices, are there any that, is there any you'd recommend, first of all? Is there any you'd say are kind of more valid, less valid? And just because I know we spoke about the Oura Ring, Fitbit, kind of Apple Watches, and I know like some of them come at a much higher price point than others. If people are just using it to kind of, how would you go about using it if you were to advise someone if to use it? Would you ever recommend it in any case?
I do like the Oura Ring. I think that's probably the most promising device, potentially followed by a newer version of the Fitbit. So I like the fact that Oura Ring can track multiple different physiological signals. So light, temperature, movement versus a standard tracker that only really can track movement maybe and some temperature potentially. So I do like that aspect of Aura, and they did validate their device with polysomnography, which I was describing earlier when I was at my aunt's lab. But I do hear people using Aura potentially, or a different device, where they felt like they got an awesome night's sleep, and then they look at the application and it's telling them their sleep score is, at a 75 or something. And I think the more we know about this, I think that feedback from the device could actually impair their performance. So in some instances, it's better not to have that feedback. So it is really interesting, but I would say potentially the Oura Ring might be useful, or maybe a newer device of Fitbit.
I think it's really interesting in that, I guess it's telling you, I don't know how they work exactly, but if it was to tell you your sleep, maybe
nobody knows.
I was going to say
Keep it all to themselves.
If it could tell you some practical tips okay, your sleep was this, you should do this to improve your sleep, then I could see it being something great. But as far as I know, a lot of the time, like I just try and do my best job, and like I'll get like I just try and do all the sleep hygiene and all those practices, and then I wake up and I feel a certain way, and you almost know if you're going to have a good night's sleep or a poor night's sleep. And if someone's listening to this, they probably already know, or they're interested in this area and they've listened to a lot of your work. They probably already know a lot of what they should be doing, so they kind of know whether or not they're going to get a better or worse night's sleep. And I don't know, people might be interested in trying different supplements and seeing if that impacts the score. But if you've kind of said the accuracy is already not there yet to provide that efficacy, then yeah, it becomes a tool that maybe isn't as helpful as what it seems to be on paper.
Yes, I do like that idea, the ability to, well, for example, reduce your caffeine intake and see how that impacts the score across time. I think the more time points you have, maybe the more reliable it would be. You wouldn't have that off night here or there where it's not tracking accurately if you're doing it many time points across time. So yeah, I think that's a good point, that it could potentially be used to even some kind of nutritional optimization. Is it better if I have a snack before bed than fasting? Sometimes athletes in general will wake up during the middle of the night starving because they've fasted, since dinner. And I'm not a nutritionist by any means, but being able to test those little things out could be useful across time.
It's a really good point in terms of the kind of the reliability versus validity. I think like it doesn't, like if it's reliable measure, then you can track trends, and that can give you information in itself. I always say it with like athletes, if they're weighing themselves on a scale, as long as it's the same scale in the same place, it doesn't matter if it's a percentage up or down off accuracy, as long as it's telling you the same sort of scores, we can track a trend in what your weight's doing. So that makes a lot of sense. So something I did want to talk about was the study that you published on the athlete sleep screening questionnaire. I'd love to hear some of the questions that are kind of involved within that, and whether or not kind of that's something, I don't know, there's a lot of coaches that listen to this. They may not be, some of them probably do work with some athletes. A lot of them will work with obviously kind of physique competitors. Is there anything from that people could apply then and ask those sort of questions to their kind of clients or even themselves?
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
We developed this questionnaire. There wasn't a questionnaire out there that is, identifying athletes with sleep problems. So that's the point of the questionnaire. It's to identify who has a clinically significant sleep problem and who needs to be referred to a sleep specialist because of this. And there wasn't really anything out there. A lot of researchers and maybe clinicians were using the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which wasn't really validated in athletes and overestimates the number of athletes having a problem. So we studied 200 Canadian national team athletes. We used actigraphs to look at how much sleep they were getting, the objective measures of sleep. We had them fill out the questionnaire. We had a certain percentage do an interview with our clinical sleep specialists. And we found that around 25% of these Canadian national team athletes had a clinically significant sleep problem. We were looking at quantity of sleep, quality of sleep, timing of sleep, were our main kind of questions that we were asking. And we found that with recommendations, with sleep education, that their sleep could be improved. If they take the test, we discover they have a sleep problem, we get them recommendations to improve their sleep, potentially get them insomnia treatment if they're suffering from that. And then when we tested them about 8 months later, we found, the majority of them were then within that normal range. And for anyone out there, you can actually go to centerforsleep.com. Maybe we can put this in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And take the questionnaire online. You can email the results to your coach. So if you have some athletes that you're working with, they can email the results to you. It gives you standard sleep education. I helped develop all this. So it gives you standard sleep education. It gives you tips if you're struggling with sleep during travel, and kind of gives you individualized recommendations based on your responses, and also tells you, yes, it does look like you're in that moderate to severe sleep category and you want to get further sleep assessment from a sleep specialist.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that service was available, because you're doing the coach's job as well, giving the individualized kind of feedback in terms of what they can do. I think that's really cool, because I similarly was looking for something simple to give to my clients, and I found, I don't know if you've heard of the SATED score. I was using that because it was a really short it was like 5 different kind of questions to ask them, and it identified some things, but I think what you've outlined here is probably more specific towards people, and it's something people can just go to the website, fill it out. I imagine it only takes like 10 minutes or something. It wasn't a kind of crazy long questionnaire or anything. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a 15 item questionnaire. It takes probably about 5 minutes to complete. And then you get the general sleep education and also the individualized recommendations depending on your responses.
And then the other one I wanted to talk about was, and I know you didn't publish this one, but you're familiar with the Athlete Sleep Behaviour Questionnaire. So I just wanted to kind of hear, what was the difference between this one to the other one? Is there anything people can take away kind of looking that up and use that for themselves?
The Athlete Sleep Screening Questionnaire that I was talking about previously is more of a way to identify athletes with sleep problems, clinically significant sleep problems, that you'd probably take, maybe during preseason, potentially once towards, I probably wouldn't recommend during the season because that can create anxiety if a problem comes up. So probably preseason and then right after the season's done. So it's more of a kind of a long-term questionnaire. The Athlete Sleep Behavior Questionnaire, my understanding is that it can be used more on a daily basis or a weekly basis. I think more research, they're absolute fabulous researchers on that questionnaire. However, there probably needs to be a little bit more research to determine that cutoff. So there isn't a clinically or a significant cutoff to divide people into poor sleepers and good sleepers using the sleep behavior questionnaire, athlete sleep behavior questionnaire. But potentially, I think it's a useful questionnaire, probably in combination with the athlete sleep screening questionnaire. Both of them could be used together, and you're using questionnaires that have been validated in athletes specifically.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's like we can give as much practical advice on this podcast. You can talk about all these things, but it's really nice to have some like actually validated resources that people can go and check out and use for themselves in practice. And then they can apply a lot of the things we've talked about with that in combination, and that should help them along their way a lot. So yeah, I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
One thing you brought up previously, and we might not have enough time to really delve into this, but it was chronotypes. And I'd love for you to kind of delve into maybe just describing what they are briefly, and then kind of talking about how can, I guess we may have already touched on it a little bit actually at the start there in terms of kind of sleep and wake times, but how can we identify which chronotype we necessarily are?
There are a couple questionnaires out there, and maybe I can send you a link to put in the show notes for people to determine what type of chronotype they are. Chronotypes, it's the preference for being a night owl or an early bird. So the preference for wanting to go to bed later, sleep in later, which is also linked with biology. So melatonin in night owls is released later than it would be for a morning type. And morning types would want to go to bed earlier, wake up earlier. And, you know, generally we say a night owl would be wanting to go to sleep after midnight, wake up after 8 a.m., whereas an early birds would be more like wanting to go to sleep before 10 p.m., wake up before 6 a.m. is kind of the general rule, I would say. And it's driven a lot by biology and genetics. So if you have people in your family who are more night owls, it may be more likely that you're a night owl as well. And we did publish a study on chronotypes in athletes, and what we found was that athletes were more likely to be a morning type, but for those athletes who were evening types, they had more sleep disturbance going on. So it's something to definitely be aware of for people, and it relates back to the timing of sleep. So as I mentioned, you know, timing of sleep is an important factor. So if I am a night owl, it's going to be more beneficial for me to go to bed later and sleep later if I'm able to do that. And in a lot of instances, that's not possible because of the school demands or work demands that people have, and our society is more geared towards those morning types. So in that situation, we can change when our melatonin is being released with the regulation of light. So we would want to block light at night if you're a night owl, and get lots of light in the morning to help advance that circadian rhythm earlier. Potentially take melatonin if you're a night owl, which there can be a lot of issues with the content of melatonin. So you want to make sure that you're getting a good supplement in that regard. But and melatonin is generally useful for shifting circadian rhythms in preparation for jet lag, let's say. Not to be used as to help you fall asleep necessarily. So melatonin is important. Blocking light at night, getting lots of light in the morning can help those night owls if they do have, you know, important obligations in the morning.
And I guess it's really interesting actually hearing, I'd never heard the strict definitions of like past midnight and then before 10 p.m. because I imagine most people the person working 9 to 5 probably goes to sleep, and most people, I guess, go to sleep between 10 and midnight I'm guessing. So between 10 and midnight is when most people, do you find, is there a spectrum? It's not like you're either an early bird or a night owl. Some people land on a bit of a spectrum.
That's correct. So, and I'm kind of throwing those numbers out there. There's not any research necessarily looking at that, but yeah, definitely there's a spectrum. There's many of us that fall in between. So about 15% of us are night owls, 15% are early birds, and the rest of us kind of fall in between. And, more extreme night owls would be 3 a.m. or later.
Wow.
So there is a spectrum there, and it does change across time or across the lifespan as well. So when we're in early childhood, we're more likely to be an early bird, and then that shifts more towards night owl in an adolescent. So peak night owl is around age 20 or so. 19 to 20 is where we see that transition to more of a night owl. And then when we hit our 50s or so, then we kind of revert back to more of that early bird. So it does change across the lifespan as well.
Yeah. I think it's really cool that you mentioned, like we already mentioned, unfortunately, some of our modern day environment can impact our ability to get to sleep. But also with the modern technology we've got, we have these things like, I guess, the light you mentioned, maybe they're SAD lights, the kind of seasonal affective disorder lights, to help kind of wake you up in the morning. I always say this to my girlfriend because she's more of a night owl. I'm like, you could use this lamp to like do your makeup in the morning or whatever is going to be. So it can like help kind of, in a sense, wake you up. And then obviously you talked about the melatonin kind of, in a sense, where I'd hate to use the term biohacking, but I guess that feels like the right term in this sense. In a sense, that's kind of what we're doing, using the modern environment to help us rather than it could hurt us in a sense.
Yes. Having what do they call it? A dawn simulator alarm clock where it gradually increases the light to then the point where, we want to wake up, it's at the brightest level, which I have a funny story about that. I had someone was house sitting and taking care of our dog, and I had the dawn simulator on, and I don't use it very often, but this was like during the winter time. And then it started making the chirping noises and stuff. And the dog sitter was sleeping in a different room. And he was pretty freaked out by this bright light with chirping birds going on. So yeah, that has been shown to be helpful for night owls in particular, having that gradual bright light coming on. But yeah, also potentially utilizing the seasonal affective disorder lights. Or they also have light glasses, which are really convenient because you're wearing them around. The one that I know about is Luminette light glasses, which uses the full spectrum of light versus the retimers, which are more that blue light only. So I have a pair of Luminette light glasses that I use for jet lag in particular, helping shift my rhythms. So that could be another strategy, is getting outside as well. If the season, if you're in summer and you're able to get outside, bright light can be as much as, even 500 times brighter than our indoor lighting, depending on if it's direct sunlight versus if you're in a dim room. So yeah, getting light outside, and in particular, in the morning hours helps. We're more sensitive to light during those morning hours, and that helps shift our rhythms to an earlier time. So trying to get at least 30 minutes outside or of bright light before noon actually improves sleep quality.
Amazing. I actually had never heard about those glasses. I'm obviously familiar, not obviously, but I am familiar with the blue light blockers. So it's great. You can have your morning spectacles and now you have your evening spectacles, and this is fantastic. So yeah, amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Amy, for coming on to the show and going through all of this. I think there's been some really great take homes, and I'm going to make sure to have those links below so that people can access the questionnaires and things. If people do want to find out more about you specifically, follow along with your work, where's the best place to reach out to you?
I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Sleep for Sport, the number 4. I'm also developing a website, sleepwelltowin.com. It's not quite ready yet, so if you go there right away, it's going to look kind of weird, but I am hoping to get some good quality information on that website, do blog posts for people, and a place to go, for people to get good quality sleep information.
Amazing. I'll make sure your Instagram handle, and I'll put the website there because we never know when people are going to be watching this podcast anyway. It's going to be here for years, so people can check that website out now or whenever they come in to listen to this. So again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone for listening. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.